The beeping was my metronome, a steady, unchanging rhythm that had scored the last 78 years of my life. It wasn't the frantic, panicked pinging you see on medical dramas. This was the slow, stubborn thump of an engine that refused to quit, even when most of its parts were begging for retirement. Each beep was a protest, a declaration. I am still here. The room smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers. The bouquet from the church ladies was already drooping, its vibrant yellows fading to a sickly brown at the edges. My lungs drew in the sterile air, a familiar, unwelcome taste. This was my third visit to this particular cardiac unit in as many years. You'd think he'd have a reserved parking spot by now. My son, David, was perched on the ugly vinyl chair by the window, scrolling through his phone. His face was etched with a concern that was genuine. I'll give him that. But it was the generic concern of a man fulfilling an obligation. He was here because you're supposed to visit your ailing father in the hospital, not because he was particularly keen on my company. The conversation had dried up hours ago, replaced by the monotonous symphony of my own vitals. The door swung open, and a blast of noise from the hallway briefly drowned out my beeping heart. It was my granddaughter, Chloe, and her brother, Leo. Chloe, 22, all sharp angles and sharper wit, carried a garish balloon that said "Get well soon" in aggressively cheerful letters. Leo, a year younger, trailed behind her, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, offering me a weak, apologetic smile. "Grandpa Landon," Chloe chirped, planting a dry kiss on my cheek. "You look like hell." "Feel like it too, kid," I grumbled, but I couldn't help the slight tug at the corner of my mouth. Her bluntness was a refreshing change from the hushed, pitying tones everyone else used. David looked up from his phone. "Language, Chloe." She rolled her eyes, a well-practiced gesture. "Oh, please, Dad. Grandpa's heard worse. He was in the war, for God's sake." She said it like it was a punchline to a joke I wasn't in on. She tied the balloon to the foot of my bed, where it bobbed idiotically, a stark contrast to the grim machinery I was wired to. Leo finally approached. "Hey, Grandpa." His voice was soft, genuine. He placed a hand on my arm. "How are you feeling?" "Like a 57 Chevy with a cracked block," I said. And he gave a real smile, one that reached his eyes. He got the reference. Leo was the quiet one, the thinker. He'd spend hours in my garage workshop, and the boy, not talking much, just watching me bring old radios and clocks back to life. There was a gentle patience to him that the rest of the family lacked. We made stilted small talk for a while. David talked about work. Chloe complained about her roommate. Leo asked if I needed the nurses for anything. The beeping continued its relentless rhythm. Then came the lull, the dangerous, empty space in a conversation that Chloe, if learned, feels compelled to fill with whatever spark of edgy humor is currently flashing through her brain. She was looking at the heart monitor, its green line tracing the jagged peaks and valleys of my stubborn existence. She nodded toward it, a wicked little grin playing on her lips. "So, Grandpa," she said, her tone dropping into a mock conspiratorial whisper, "that thing, how's it holding up?" "You know, just curious. My friend Megan's dad is on the transplant list. Been waiting 6 months. Nasty business." David shot her a warning look. "Chloe, not now." "What?" she said, all feigned innocence. "It's a valid question. It's important to be prepared, to know these things." She turned her grin back to me, and it didn't reach her eyes. They were cold, calculating, testing boundaries, as always. "I'm just saying, we're all kind of waiting for the old man's heart to give out. You know, the ultimate inheritance." Might as well put it to good use. The air was sucked out of the room. The beeping seemed to get louder, each tone a hammer strike in the sudden, thick silence. David's face went from weary to ashen. Leo physically flinched, pulling his hand back from my arm, if my skin had burned him. His eyes were wide with horror. And me. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with my failing ventricles. It was a deep, glacial chill that started in the very organ she was so casually writing off and seeped into my bones. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was a profound, soul-crushing hurt. A dismissal, a reduction of my entire being, my entire life, my love for her, into a spare part she was impatiently waiting to harvest. I looked at her. I really looked. I saw the young woman I'd taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd quietly supplemented. I saw a stranger. My voice, when it finally came, was low and gravelly, stripped of all emotion. It was the sound of a door closing. "Get out." Chloe's smirk faltered. She'd expected a laugh, maybe a gruff retort. She hadn't expected this. "Grandpa, come on." It was a joke. A little dark humor. "Jesus, get out," I repeated, my gaze fixed on the ceiling tiles above me. I couldn't look at her anymore. "Landon," David started, his voice tense, trying to play peacemaker. "All of you," I said, the coldness solidifying into something hard and immutable. "Get out now." There was a mumbled argument, protests, apologies from Leo, that I didn't acknowledge. Eventually, the door swished shut, and I was alone with the beeping. But the rhythm had changed. It was no longer a stubborn declaration. It was a furious, pounding drum, a war beat, waiting for the old man's heart. The words echoed in the sterile silence, each repetition a tiny, precise incision. They laid me bare on that hospital bed, not as a grandfather, not as a man, but as a carcass in waiting. A resource, my love, my history, the stories it told, and the lessons I'd tried to impart. None of it mattered. I was just a container for parts they felt entitled to. The coldness in my chest began to heat into a slow, simmering rage. It was a clean rage, clarifying. It burned away the self-pity, the fear of dying, the sadness of my dwindling days. It left behind a single, diamond-hard purpose. You want to joke about my heart, girl. You want to treat my death like a delayed delivery you're impatiently tracking. Fine. Let's see how you like the joke when the delivery is permanently cancelled. The next few days were a masterclass in quiet fury. I was the model patient. I took my medications with a smile. I did my breathing exercises without complaint. I was polite to the nurses, charming even. All the while, inside, I was plotting. The cold anger had become a lens, focusing my mind with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had a lawyer, Everett Sloan. We'd served together in Korea. He was a hard man, pragmatic, and understood the value of discretion. When he visited, he didn't bring flowers. He brought a legal pad and a pen. "Landon," he said, settling his aging frame into the chair, "you look like you've got a bee in your bonnet." "I need to amend my will, Everett," I said, my voice calm. He nodded, uncapping his pen. "Figured. Changing the distribution. Cutting someone out." It was a routine question. "No," I said, looking at the heart monitor. "The will is fine. It's something else. I'm a registered organ donor. Have been for decades." Everett looked up, curious. "Okay. I want to place a specific, legally binding restriction on my donor registration." I laid it out for him, coolly, precisely. Every word was measured. I wanted a clause added, a codicil, a legally airtight document that would instruct the organ donor registry that in the event of my death, my heart specifically, and only my heart, was to be categorically denied to Chloe Elizabeth Miller, and furthermore, that it was to be denied to any of her immediate, direct descendants, should they ever require it. Everett stopped writing. He stared at me over his glasses. For the first time in the 50 years I'd known him, he looked genuinely stunned. "Landon," he said slowly, "that's highly unusual. Morally, ethically, are you sure? What in God's name did she do?" "She made a joke, Everett," I said, my eyes still on the green line tracing my life. "A tasteless joke. And I've decided to have a tasteless sense of humor about it, too." He argued, of course. He cited medical ethics, the sanctity of the donor system, the impossibility of enforcing such a thing in a moment of crisis. He talked about forgiveness, about family. I listened patiently, and then I repeated my instructions. "This isn't about ethics, Everett. It's about a message. I don't care if it's enforceable. I don't care some intern in an ignores it in 10 years. I want the document to exist. I want it notarized. I want it filed with the registry and attached to my medical files. I want her to know it exists. The last part made him go quiet. You want her to know? Oh, yes, I said, a faint, cold smile finally touching my lips. That's the whole point. She thinks my heart is a commodity. I want to make it the one commodity in the world she can never have. I want her to know that. Everett looked at me for a long time. He saw the war veteran, the stubborn old coot, who'd built a successful business from nothing. The man who held grudges like others, held treasured memories. He saw my resolve. It was absolute. He sighed, a sound of pure professional resignation, and picked up his pen. All right, Landon. It's your heart. He'll draw it up. The language will have to be very specific. Make it ironclad, I said. The paperwork was executed with a quiet efficiency that belied its bizarre nature. Everett worked his legal magic, creating a document that was just plausible enough, just threatening enough to linger in hospital databases like a ghost. It was a shot across the bow. A message in a bottle was casting into the future, addressed to a version of Chloe I hoped would one day understand the weight of her words. I was discharged a week later. The world outside the hospital seemed too bright, too loud. My house, a quiet, sturdy place he'd built with my own hands decades ago, felt like a museum to a life that was no longer sure it lived well. The smell of sawdust and old books usually comforted me. Now, it just felt empty. The family tried to rug sweep. David called, his voice tight with forced cheerfulness. Dad, Chloe feels awful. She's a kid. She didn't mean it. She's 22, David. That's not a kid. She meant the humor. She didn't mean the consequence. There's a difference. He sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. Can't you just let it go? For the sake of family. The family, I said calmly, is exactly what I'm thinking about. There was a silence on his end. He didn't understand. He never would. To him, this was a petty squabble to be smoothed over. To me, it was a fundamental matter of respect, of the basic courtesy of human decency. Head raised a daughter who saw her grandfather as a vending machine shake it enough, and eventually something valuable might fall out. Leo visited. He came bearing a six-pack of a local craft beer he thought I'd like and a deep, abiding shame. He couldn't look me in the eye for the first hour. I'm so sorry, Grandpa, he finally mumbled, staring into his bottle. What she said, it was monstrous. I wanted to disappear into the floor. It wasn't your fault, Leo, I said. His pain was genuine, and it touched the small part of me that wasn't frozen solid. I know, but she's my sister. It makes me sick. He looked up, his eyes earnest. She doesn't get it. She thinks you're overreacting. She thinks it's just you being a grumpy old man. Maybe I am, I conceded. But even grumpy old men have feelings. Even grumpy old men get to decide what's done with their own parts. He nodded, but I could tell the true depth of my retaliation. The cold finality of the legal document now sitting in Everett's safe would horrify him. So I didn't tell him. This was between me and Chloe. This was my secret, my time bomb. Life settled into a new, brittle normal. Family gatherings were tense affairs. Chloe oscillated between sullen silence and bursts of defensive sarcasm. How's the ticker, Grandpa? She'd ask, a challenge in her eyes. Still beating, I'd reply, my voice level. Against all expectations. I watched her. I studied her. I saw the entitlement that had curdled into something uglier. She talked about her friends' inheritances, about their parents buying them apartments, with a covetousness that turned my stomach. She was waiting, not for my heart, perhaps, but for my death. She saw it as a payday, an event that would solve her problems and fund her lifestyle. The joke in the hospital hadn't been a joke at all. It had been a slip of the mask. The months turned into a year. My health, miraculously, stabilized. The old Chevy's engine kept chugging, much to everyone's surprise, and perhaps, in Chloe's case, disappointment. The cold rage inside me had become a constant companion, a core of ice that kept me sharp, kept me alive out of sheer spite. The reckoning came on a bright Sunday afternoon. We were all at David's house for a forced, cheerful barbecue. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal and unspoken words. Chloe was holding court on the patio, complaining about her student loans to a captive audience of aunts and uncles. It's just impossible, she was saying, her voice a well-practiced whine. He'll be paying them off until I'm 50. It's so unfair. Some people just get lucky. They have family that can help them. Or they get, I dunno, a windfall. She glanced over at me. I was sitting in a lawn chair, a glass of iced tea in my hand, saying nothing, just watching. An uncle, trying to change the subject, made the mistake of bringing up a news story about a celebrity who had received a life-saving transplant. Miracles of modern medicine, he said jovially. Chloe snorted. Must be nice to have that kind of connections. Regular people just sit on a list and hope. You gotta know somebody, or be somebody. The conversation meandered, but the seed was planted in her mind. She'd had a few drinks, enough to lubricate her sense of entitlement and dissolve her last shreds of tact. She wandered over and plopped into the chair next to me. You're still on the donor list, right, Grandpa? She asked, her tone light, conversational, as if she were asking about the weather. I took a slow sip of my tea. I am. Good, she said, nodding with a fake solemnity. It's important, very noble. She paused, then leaned in closer. You know, with your history, your heart probably isn't any good to anyone. But the rest of it, kidneys, liver, that's good stuff. That's a real legacy. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her. A legacy? Yeah, she said, warming to her theme, encouraged by my lack of reaction. I mean, let's be practical. It's not like you can take it with you. And let's face it, Grandpa, you're not getting any younger. We all have to be realistic. It's just biology. She was so proud of herself. So mature. So practical. I set my glass down on the side table with a precise, quiet click. The chatter around us seemed to fade away. You're right, Chloe, I said, my voice so calm it was almost a whisper. It is just biology and paperwork. She frowned, confused. Paperwork, yes. The paperwork I had drawn up last year, after your joke in the hospital. Her face was a blank slate. She truly didn't remember. It had been so inconsequential to her. I helped her. You said you were all waiting for the old man's heart, that it was the ultimate inheritance. A flicker of memory, then a dismissive shrug. That, God, Grandpa, that was forever ago. I told you. It was a joke. You're still hung up on that. I am, I said. You see, I found it in incredibly poor taste. It showed a profound lack of character, a stunning selfishness. It made me question your values on a fundamental level. She rolled her eyes, a gesture of pure adolescent impatience. Here we go. The big lecture on values. No lecture, I said. Just a statement of fact. You demonstrated that you view me, and my death, as a transactional event, a transfer of assets. So, I decided to make a transaction of my own. I had her attention now. The sarcasm was fading, replaced by a wary confusion. What are you talking about? I am still an organ donor, I said, enunciating every word clearly, cleanly. Every part of me is available to any stranger, any human being on this planet, who might need it to live another day, to see their children grow up. Anyone. I paused, letting the weight of that settle. Anyone, I repeated, except for you. Her face went still. What? My heart, I said, leaning forward slightly, locking my eyes with hers, will never be yours. It is legally, specifically, and categorically denied to you. Chloe Elizabeth Miller. My lawyer made sure of it. It's in my file. It's with the registry. If you are ever dying, and my heart is a match, and it's sitting on ice ready to go, they will throw it in the medical waste bin before they give it to you. You are forbidden from it, by my decree. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly, completely speechless. You can't do that, she finally stammered. A weak, pathetic sound. I already have, I said softly. I decided that if my heart was just an inheritance to you, then you didn't deserve it. An inheritance can be withheld, and so I have withheld it. The full implications began to dawn on her. This wasn't about a joke anymore. This was a permanent, cold-blooded disinheritance of the most brutal kind. It wasn't about money or property. It was about life itself. I had looked at my own granddaughter and decided she was unworthy of the piece of me that could save her. Her shock curdled into a boiling, sputtering rage. "You're insane. You're a sick, crazy old man. That's evil. Who does that?" "A man who doesn't appreciate being treated like an organ farm," I said, my voice still terrifyingly calm. "You wanted to be practical. So am I. You told me what you were waiting for. I'm just telling you the wait is over. You will never get it." She shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the patio stones. All conversation had stopped. Everyone was staring. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I'll fight it. I'll tell them you're senile. It's not legal." "It's perfectly legal," I said, picking up my iced tea again. "My lawyer saw to that. Everett Sloan. You remember him? A very thorough man. You're welcome to get your own lawyer to review the documents. I'll have Everett send you a copy." The offer, made so reasonably, so coldly, shattered her completely. She wasn't just angry, she was unmoored. Her entire worldview, where she was the center and the rest of us were supporting actors whose job was to provide for her, had just been vaporized. She looked at her father, her eyes wild. "Dad, are you hearing this?" Hayes lost his mind. David looked from her to me, his face a mask of bewildered horror. He didn't know what to say. He was a man who solved problems with apologies and checkbooks. This was beyond him. "Dad," he said, his voice weak. "Is this true?" "It is," I said, not taking my eyes off Chloe. Every word. With a strangled cry of pure fury, Chloe turned and fled into the house, the screen door slamming shut behind her like a gunshot. The silence on the patio was absolute. You could hear the charcoal briquettes cracking in the grill. 20 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, a mixture of disbelief, judgment, and a faint, hidden thrill. I took a long, slow sip of my iced tea. It was sweet, very sweet. The metronome in my chest beat on, steady and strong, a rhythm of cold, perfect victory. The slam of the screen door was the full stop at the end of my sentence. It echoed across the suddenly silent patio, a sound more final than any judge's gavel. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. They were statues in a garden of suburban normalcy, frozen mid-action. An uncle with a spatula suspended over a smoking burger, an aunt with a glass of wine halfway to her open mouth. My son David staring at me as if he'd just sprouted a second head. The only thing that moved was the smoke from the grill, curling up into the bright blue sky, indifferent to the human devastation below. I took another sip of my iced tea. The clink of the ice cubes in the sudden silence was deafening. David found his voice first. It was a broken, strangled thing. "Dad, my God, what did you just do?" I turned my head slowly to look at him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a kind of horrified confusion. He was a man who lived in a world of spreadsheets and client meetings, where problems were solved with memos and compromise. This was an act of nuclear war in his peaceful, predictable universe. I believe I was perfectly clear. "David," I said, my voice still unnervingly calm. The cold core inside me held firm. There was no tremor, no regret, only the clean, sharp certainty of a necessary amputation. "Clear. You told your own granddaughter she can't have your heart if she needs it. That's not clear. That's monstrous," he sputtered, finally finding volume. The word monstrous hung in the air. It was the same word Leo had used about Chloe's joke. The symmetry was not lost on me. "No," I corrected him gently. "I simply enacted a consequence. She made her views on my body, my life, and my death perfectly clear. I found those views morally reprehensible. This is my response. It is a matter of consent, David. My body, my choice. Surely you believe in that." He floundered, his mouth opening and closing. He couldn't argue the principle, but the application was unthinkable. "But it's Chloe. She's your family." She didn't mean it. She meant every word, I said, my gaze shifting to the house, where I could hear the faint, muffled sounds of hysterical sobbing. She just didn't mean for me to hear them so literally. She sees me as a resource, a thing. I have merely clarified the terms of that relationship. The resource is off limits. The spell was broken for the rest of the family. A low murmur of conversation started, shocked whispers behind hands. My sister-in-law, Margot, stood up, her face a mask of pious disapproval. Landon, I think you should go. You've upset everyone. This is a family day. I almost laughed. The sheer, breathtaking banality of her response. You've upset everyone. As if I'd brought up politics at the dinner table, not just redrawn the boundaries of life and death within our bloodline. Of course, Margot, I said, setting my glass down and pushing myself to my feet. My knees protested, my heart giving a familiar, tired thump. The old Chevy was still running, but the drive had been rough. I wouldn't want to ruin the barbecue. I didn't look at David again. I just walked, slowly and deliberately, across the patio, through the gate, and to my old sedan parked on the street. I could feel their eyes on my back, 20 different versions of the same stunned judgment. I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt a semblance of peace. The score was settled. The message had been delivered. The drive home was quiet. I replayed the scene in my mind, not with guilt, but with the analytical precision of a watchmaker examining a complex movement. Each word, each reaction, each flicker of emotion on Chloe's face, the moment of confusion, then dawning comprehension, then sheer, unadulterated terror. It was the terror that confirmed everything. She wasn't outraged on principle, she was outraged because a safety net she hadn't even consciously acknowledged she relied on had been yanked away. She was afraid for her future self, a self that might one day be desperate and need that which I had now forbidden. Good. Let her be afraid. Let her understand that words are not just sounds. They are actions. They have weight. They have consequences that can stretch years, decades, into a future she couldn't yet imagine. My house welcomed me with its familiar silence. I went to my workshop, the one place that always made sense. The smell of linseed oil, metal, and old wood was a bomb. Here, things could be fixed, gears could be cleaned, springs could be replaced, connections could be resoldered. If something was broken, you could find the break and mend it. Human relationships were messy. Sometimes the break was fatal. Sometimes the most honest thing you could do was acknowledge it was beyond repair and stop trying to force the pieces back together. I picked up a vintage carriage clock he'd been restoring. Its brass face was dull, its hands still. I lost myself in the rhythm of taking it apart, laying each tiny screw, each delicate gear, on a soft cloth. This was a language I understood. The phone started ringing around dusk. I let the machine pick it up. It was David. His voice was tight, angry, then pleading. Dad, pick up. We need to talk about this. You can't just drop a bomb like that and walk away. Call me back. Beep. An hour later. Dad, it's me again. Chloe is a wreck. Her mother is here. We're all we don't understand. This is crazy. Please, call me. Beep. Later still, the tone had changed. It was colder. Landon, this is Susan, my ex-daughter-in-law. Her voice was like chipped ice. I cannot believe what you have done to my daughter. The psychological damage, it's unforgivable. If you think for 1 second that any court in this country would uphold such a vile, vindictive thing, you are sorely mistaken. We will fight this. Consider yourself hearing from our lawyer. Beep. I smiled faintly, wiping a gear with a soft cloth. Go ahead, Susan. Get a lawyer. Have him call Everett. I'd enjoy that. The next call was from Leo. His voice was hesitant, thick with emotion. Grandpa, it's Leo. I heard what happened. I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry for everything. Just call me if you want to talk. Okay. I love you. Beep. That one stung. The cold core in my chest thawed, just for a second. Leo was collateral damage in this war had started. He was a good kid, caught in the crossfire of his sister's avarice and his grandfather's wrath. I made a mental note to call him tomorrow. This wasn't his fight. The following days were a study in fallout. The story, of course, spread through the family grapevine, mutating and growing with each retelling. I was now the lunatic who had disinherited his granddaughter from his very organs. I was a monster, a sick old man, losing his grip, as my cousin Edith so delicately put it in a voicemail full of faux concern. I didn't engage. I let Everett handle the one terse letter from Susan's lawyer, a young shark named Waters, who clearly thought he was dealing with a doddering fool. Everett's response was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, thick with citations, references to precedent, and a chillingly confident assurance that the documents were not only valid, but would be defended with every resource at our firm's disposal. We heard nothing back from Waters. The real battle, I knew, wasn't legal. It was emotional. It was a siege designed to make me capitulate out of sheer exhaustion. David showed up at my house 2 days after the barbecue. He looked like he hadn't slept. "We need to talk," he said. Standing on my porch, his shoulders slumped. I let him in. He didn't sit down. He paced my living room and the caged animal. "How could you do it, Dad?" he asked, not looking at me. "How could you say that to her? Do you have any idea what you've done? She's devastated. She feels like you've cursed her." "I've done nothing to her," I said, staying in my armchair. "I've simply clarified my own wishes regarding my own body. Her feelings about that are her own responsibility." He stopped pacing and finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "But it's a heart, Dad. You're talking about her life. What if someday she really needs one? What if she gets sick? Are you really going to let your granddaughter die because of a stupid joke?" The question hung in the air, stark and brutal. It was the core of it, the moral weapon they all thought they could use to bludgeon me into submission. I met his gaze. "David, listen to me very carefully. The scenario you're describing is so statistically remote it's almost fictional. She would need to be in heart failure. My heart would need to be a viable match. I would need to die in a manner that allows for its harvest. The chances are astronomical." This was never about the actual, physical heart. Then what the hell was it about? He cried, throwing his hands up in frustration. "It was about the metaphorical heart," I said, my voice rising for the first time, the cold anger flashing hot. "It was about the heart that loved her, that held her when she cried, that paid for her dance lessons and her braces and her goddamn college textbooks. That heart she reduced to a commodity. She didn't want that heart, David. She made that perfectly clear. She wanted the pump, the muscle, the thing in my chest that she sees as her property. So I told her she can't have it. It's that simple." He stared at me, and for a flickering second, I saw a sliver of understanding in his eyes. He saw the pain behind the anger. He saw the profound hurt that had spawned this nuclear response. But it was quickly buried under his identity as a father, as a fixer. "She's young, Dad," he said, his voice weary. "She's selfish. Kids are selfish. You can't hold them to the same standard." "I can," I said flatly. "And I do. And I will. This conversation is over, David. The matter is closed." He left, defeated. The siege, however, continued. There were letters from Chloe herself, first furious and accusatory, then later, pleading and tear-stained, full of "I'm sorry, you were offended" non-apologies. I read them once, then filed them away in a drawer with Everett's copies of the legal documents. They were pieces of the record now. Months turned into a year. The sharp edge of the scandal dulled into a persistent, low-grade family ache. Holidays were complicated. That first Christmas, Chloe pointedly did not attend the family gathering at David's. Susan made a show of it, of course. "She's not comfortable, given the atmosphere," Shed told David, loud enough for everyone to hear. Leo came, though. He gave me a hesitant hug at the door. "Hey, Grandpa." "Leo," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Good to see you." We didn't talk about it. We talked about his job, about a new car he was thinking of buying, about the old clocks in my workshop. It was a truce, fragile but welcome. I could see the conflict in him, his innate decency warring with his loyalty to his sister. He didn't agree with what he'd done, but unlike the others, he seemed to genuinely try to understand why he'd done it. The rest of the family treated me with a careful, distant politeness. I was the radioactive uncle. They made small talk, but their eyes skittered away from mine. I was a walking, talking memento mori, a reminder that generosity could have a limit, that love could be conditional, that the old man might just fight back. I didn't mind. The silence suited me. I had my books, my clocks, my routines. My health, perversely, remained stable. The old Chevy, despite its cracked block, kept puttering along. I think the anger, the cold purpose, had given me a reason to keep the engine running. I was waiting, not to die, but to see what would become of my little decree. The first real test came about 18 months after the barbecue. I was raking leaves in my front yard when a car I didn't recognize pulled up. It was a sleek, expensive European sedan. The driver's door opened, and a man in a perfectly tailored suit got out. He was in his late 40s, with the confident, slightly impatient air of someone for whom time was money. "Landon Miller?" he asked, though it was clear he knew it was me. "That's me," I said, leaning on my rake. "I'm Robert Waters, Susan's attorney." I nodded slowly. So, the shark had decided to pay a personal visit. This was unexpected. I figured, "What can I do for you, Mr. Waters?" "I believe our business was concluded through our lawyers. I was in the area," he said, a thin, professional smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "I thought it might be beneficial to speak man to man. Clear the air." "The air seems fine from here," I said. His smile tightened. "Mr. Miller, I'll be frank. This situation with your granddaughter, it's causing her a great deal of anxiety. It's a cloud hanging over her future. A very specific, statistically improbable cloud," I observed. "Be that as it may," he said, brushing aside my pedantry, "the psychological toll is real. My client is concerned for her daughter's well-being. We all are. I've reviewed the documents Mr. Sloan prepared. They are creative. They are legally sound," I said. "In a narrow, theoretical sense, perhaps," he conceded. "But let's talk reality. Organ donation is a chaotic, time-sensitive process. The idea that a harried transplant coordinator is going to cross-reference a database for specific, named exclusions for a specific organ is fanciful. At best, this document," he said, as if the word itself was distasteful, "is a gesture. A very hurtful, very damaging gesture. But it is highly unlikely to ever have any practical effect." I studied him. He was good. He was using reason to dismantle my position, trying to make me see the folly of my own actions, to make me feel childish. "So you're saying you've wasted my time," I said. "I'm saying you've caused your family a great deal of pain for what is, in essence, a symbolic act," he said smoothly. "Now, we can end that pain today. You rescind the directive. You sign a paper I have right here," he patted his briefcase, stating it was made in error, under duress. "We all move on. The family heals. Isn't that what you want?" He was so slick, so sure of himself. He thought he was dealing with an irrational old man who could be coaxed and flattered and reasoned back into the fold. I looked past him, at my house, at the life he'd built. I thought of the cold, clean feeling of rightness it felt on the patio. I thought of Chloe's face, not in terror, but in cold, calculating avarice. "Mr. Waters," I said, my voice quiet, "do you have children?" The question threw him. Yes, 2 boys. "And if one of them looked at you one day and told you they were waiting for you to die so they could cash in on your life insurance policy, how would you feel? What would you do?" His professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of something human behind it. Understanding, discomfort. "That's a hypothetical, Mr. Miller, and it's not the same." "It's exactly the same," I said. "It's about reducing a person to a payout." My response was proportionate. "The document stays. The gesture, as you call it, stands. The symbol is the entire point." His mask snapped back into place, colder now. The friendly pretense was gone. "Then you leave us no choice. We will be pursuing a formal psychological evaluation. We will argue you lack the testamentary capacity to make such a decision. We will have you declared unfit, and the document voided." I actually laughed. A short, sharp bark that startled him. "You do that, son. You go right ahead. You get your court order and your psych eval. My doctor will tell you my mind is the one thing on this old body that's still in perfect working order, and Everett Sloane will eat you and your fancy suit for breakfast. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have leaves to rake. I turned my back on him. I heard him stand there for a moment. Then the sound of his car door opening and closing, and the expensive purr of his engine fading down the street. My hands were trembling slightly on the rake handle, not from fear, from adrenaline. The battle lines were drawn. They weren't going to give up. This was no longer about Chloe's hurt feelings. This was about winning. For Susan. It was about proving she could bend me to her will. For Waters. It was about winning a case. I went inside and called Everett. I told him about the visit. Everett chuckled. A dry, raspy sound. A psych eval. Oh, he'd love that. He'd absolutely love it. Let them try, Landon. It'll be the most expensive fishing expedition of their lives. They have no grounds. None. I know, I said. They're trying to scare you, he said. They think you're old and alone and you'll crack under pressure. I've been under pressure before, Everett, I said. Thinking of a frozen hillside in Korea a lifetime ago. This is nothing. I know, he said, his voice turning serious. Just keep your head down. Don't engage. Let them waste their money. This will blow over. But it didn't blow over. The threat of legal action, however hollow, seemed to energize the opposition. The family gossip mill went into overdrive. I was now not just a monster, but a mentally unstable monster. Stories from decades ago were dredged up and re-examined for signs of incipient madness. My temper once at a contractor who did shoddy work. My grief after my wife died. All of it was now being twisted into evidence of a long-standing cognitive decline. I became a ghost at family functions. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. People looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. The only one who would still meet my eyes was Leo. He started visiting more often, usually under the pretext of asking for advice on some DIY project or another. I knew he was checking on me. I appreciated it. One evening, he was over, helping me clean out my gutters. We were sitting on the porch afterwards, drinking beer as the sun went down. Heard Mom's lawyer paid you a visit, he said quietly, not looking at me. Yep. They're serious about this, Grandpa. The psychological thing. I know. He was silent for a long time. Is it, was it worth it? All of this. The fighting. The mess. I took a long pull of my beer. It was a fair question. The cold certainty he'd felt was still there, but it was now surrounded by the weariness of the prolonged conflict. The clean, surgical strike had turned into a grinding war of attrition. Leo, I said, what is your sister doing right now? He frowned. What do you mean? Is she in school? Does she have a job? What is she building with her life? He looked down at his hands. She's between things right now. She's kinda waiting for this to be over. Waiting, I repeated. She's always waiting, isn't she? Waiting for a windfall. Waiting for an inheritance. Waiting for my heart. She's waiting for life to happen to her, instead of making it happen for herself. This mess, as you call it, is the most real thing she's ever been involved in. It's a consequence. It's a wall she can't talk her way around. For the first time in her life, she's having to confront the fact that her actions have a permanent, unchangeable effect on the world. That is a painful lesson, but it is a necessary one. So yes, for that alone, it was worth it. He absorbed this, his young face serious in the twilight. It just seems like such a permanent solution. Some problems are permanent, Leo, I said. Some breaks can't be fixed. You just have to learn to live with the new shape of things. I didn't know it then, but the shape of things was about to change again, in a way none of us could have predicted. The theoretical, statistical, fanciful scenario was about to become terrifyingly real, not for Chloe, but for me. It started with a pain, a crushing weight on my chest that stole the breath from my lungs one Tuesday morning. I was making coffee. It was different from the usual aches and pains. This was urgent. This was final. The world grayed at the edges. I managed to knock the phone off the hook and press 911 before the darkness swallowed me whole. The beeping was back, but it was different. It was faster. more frantic. It was the sound of an engine seizing, of metal screaming in protest. I was in the IQ again. Tubes again. Lights again. The smell of antiseptic. A doctor with a tired face was talking to David, who was there, his face a mask of genuine fear this time. Massive myocardial infarction, extensive damage, cardiogenic shock. The words swam in and out of focus. I heard the doctor say something about not a candidate for transplant. My age, the damage, other complications. The list of reasons was long. David's voice, desperate. There's nothing at all. The doctor sighed. The only thing that would save him now is a new heart. And that's just not in the cards. I'm sorry. Well, make him comfortable. A new heart. The ultimate inheritance. The joke. The decree. The lawyer. The threat of a psych eval. It all circled in my foggy brain. A carousel of irony. I had forbidden my heart to Chloe. And now it was worthless to everyone. The one thing I had thought I could control, the one piece of property I had so fiercely defended, was now just a lump of dying muscle, of no use to anyone. I wanted to laugh. It was the funniest, cruelest joke the universe had ever played. The beeping began to slow. The frantic pinging settled into a slower, more erratic rhythm. The old Chevy was finally giving up the ghost. I could feel it. The cold core inside me was still there, but the machine that housed it was shutting down. David was holding my hand, crying. He was saying things. I'm sorry. I love you. Forgive us. I tried to squeeze his hand. I don't know if I managed to. My mind drifted. I thought of Chloe. Was she waiting? Was she hoping? Or was she, for the first time, feeling a flicker of something else? Not hope, but perhaps the chilling understanding of what I had truly taken from her. It wasn't just an organ. It was the illusion of safety. The fantasy that someone else's death could be her solution. I had taken that from her, and now I was taking myself from them all. The beeping slowed further. The peaks and valleys on the green screen grew farther apart. I thought of my heart, not the failing one in my chest, but the one that had loved. My wife's hand in mine. My son's first steps. Leo's serious, thoughtful face as he watched me work. That heart had been full. That heart had been my real legacy. And that, I realized with a final, stunning clarity, was the one thing I could never will away. That was the inheritance they had already received, whether they knew it or not. The beeping became a long, sustained tone. The green line went flat, and the ultimate organ donor donated nothing at all. The flatline tone wasn't the end. It was a doorway. One moment, there was the crushing weight, the frantic beeping, David's tear-streaked face blurring above me. The next, there was lightness, a profound, unimaginable absence of pain. I was floating, looking down at the scene below. My body, pale and shrunken, lay on the hospital bed, a discarded shell. The nurses moved with a quiet, respectful efficiency, switching off the monitors, beginning the somber rituals of the dead. David was being led from the room, his shoulders shaking. I felt no urge to follow him, no pull toward a bright light. There was only a vast, silent curiosity, and a question, hanging in the void. What happens now? The answer came not in words, but in a shift of perspective. It was like tuning a radio dial, the static clearing to pick up a specific frequency. The world dissolved and reformed, but it was still the same world. I was in Everett Sloane's office. Time had passed. A week, maybe. The room smelled of old books and lemon polish. Everett sat behind his massive oak desk, his face more lined and weary than I remembered. Opposite him, arranged in a semicircle of tense expectation, was my family. David, looking hollowed out, still wearing a suit that smelled of funeral flowers. Susan, perched on the edge of her chair, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp with avaricious gleam and quiet-eyed. And Chloe, she was different. The defiant anger was gone, replaced by a sullen, nervous exhaustion. She kept picking at a thread on her black dress, her eyes darting around the room, avoiding everyone's gaze. She looked young and terribly vulnerable. Leo was there too, sitting slightly apart, his hands clasped between his knees, staring at the Persian rug as if he wished it would swallow him whole. Thank you all for coming. Everett began, his voice a dry, legal rasp. He adjusted his glasses. We are here to execute the last will and testament of Landon James Miller. He made a show of opening a heavy, sealed envelope and pulling out the familiar document. My will. It updated it after Martha died, leaving the bulk of my estate, the house, my savings, the proceeds from the sale of my business to David, with trusts set up for the grandchildren. It was straightforward, conventional. Also, they thought. Everett read through the preliminaries, the boilerplate language. The room was thick with held breath. Susan was practically vibrating. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. The payout. To my son, David Miller. Everett read. I leave the sum of $100,000, free of tax, with the hope that he uses it to find some happiness of his own making. David flinched as if struck. It wasn't the amount, it was substantial, but not life-changing. It was the words, of his own making. A gentle, posthumous rebuke for a life spent following paths laid down by others, chiefly Susan. Susan's face tightened. This was not the windfall she'd anticipated. To my granddaughter, Chloe Elizabeth Miller, Everett continued, his voice never wavering. I leave the sum of $1. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes wide, uncomprehending. What? The word was a choked whisper from David. Susan found her voice, shrill and outraged. $1. This is an insult. This is malicious. He can't do that. Well, contest this. Everett ignored her, his eyes still on the document. And to my grandson, Leo Michael Miller, I leave the remainder of my estate, including my home and all its contents, my workshop, my investments, and any other assets not explicitly mentioned herein. Leo's head jerked up. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. No, he breathed. No, that's not right. The hell it is. Susan shrieked, launching herself out of her chair. This is that organ madness all over again. He was not of sound mind. I told you, David. I told you he'd lost it. We will fight this. Leo, you're not keeping that money. You hear me? You will sign it over to this family. Leo was staring at Everett, his eyes pleading. I don't understand. Why? Why would he do this? Everett finally looked up from the will. He took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. He was of perfectly sound mind. Susan, I had him evaluated independently, twice, after your threats. His cognitive faculties were intact. As for his reasons, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a second, smaller envelope. This one was not legal-sized. It was a simple white envelope, the kind you mail a letter in. My handwriting was on the front. For Leo, to be read after. He left you a letter, Everett said, handing it to Leo. Leo's hands trembled as he took it. Susan made a move as if to snatch it, but a look from Everett froze her in place. Read it, David said, his voice hollow. Read it aloud. Leo looked like he wanted to be sick, but he carefully tore open the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. He cleared his throat, his voice shaky. Leo, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Everett has just turned your world upside down. I'm sorry for the shock, but know that this was not an impulsive decision. It was the most considered choice I have ever made. You asked me once if it was all worth it. The fight with Chloe, the mess. This is my answer. I am not punishing Chloe by giving her $1. I gave her exactly what she valued me for, money. A token amount, because that's all our relationship became in her eyes, a transaction. She valued the potential of my death over the reality of my life. So I have settled that account. It is closed. I am not rewarding you for your silence, or for being the good grandchild. This is not a prize for good behavior. I am giving you my world, because you are the only one who ever truly saw it. You saw the value in the old clocks and the quiet workshop. You understood that a thing isn't valuable because it's new or expensive, but because of the history it holds, the care it represents, the patience required to restore it. You saw the man, not the wallet. You valued the heart that was beating, not the one that might be harvested. The house is yours. The money is yours. Do with it what you will. Build a life. Make something. Be happy. And if you can, try to understand. This was never about spite. It was about legacy. And the legacy isn't money. It's values. It's respect. It's love. I am leaving you mine. Grandpa. Leo finished reading. A single tear traced a path down his cheek and splashed onto the paper. He didn't make a sound. The room was silent. Susan's rage had been replaced by a cold, stunned hatred. She was looking at Leo not as her son, but as an adversary who had stolen her birthright. David was crying openly, silently. The words "find some happiness of his own making" had clearly struck a deep and painful chord. And Chloe was just sitting there. The letter hadn't been addressed to her. Its words weren't meant for her. But she had heard them. She had heard herself described as a closed account. A settled transaction. The sullenness was gone from her face, replaced by a dawning, awful emptiness. The dollar bill, when Everett handed it to her, felt like a burning coal. She stared at it in her palm, if it were a foreign object. Something she didn't understand. She had gotten exactly what she had asked for, and for the first time, she seemed to realize it was nothing. Absolutely nothing. The frequency shifted again. The scene in Everett's office dissolved. I was pulled, not by my own desire, but by a force far greater, a current of consequence. I was in Leo's new car, my old sedan, a month later. He was driving to my house. His house now. The for sale sign was gone from Susan and David's lawn. David had moved out. The fight over the will had been the final, cataclysmic quake that shattered the already fractured foundation of their marriage. Susan had demanded he force Leo to contest, to split the inheritance. David, for the first time in his life, had refused. The words of the will and the letter had broken something in him, but they had also freed him. Had gotten an apartment. He was, I sensed, trying to figure out what happiness of his own making might look like. Leo pulled into the driveway of my house. His house. He sat there for a long time, just looking at it. Had been staying there since the reading of the will, but it still didn't feel like his. He went inside. The place was quiet, still full of my things. He walked through the living room, running a hand over the back of my armchair. He went into the kitchen and made himself a sandwich, but he didn't eat it. He was haunted. The weight of the inheritance was a physical thing on his shoulders. He ended up in the workshop. This was where he always ended up. The smell of it seemed to calm him. He looked at the benches, the tools hanging in their precise places, the half-finished projects. His eyes fell on the vintage carriage clock, been working on the day Waters visited. It was still in pieces on the soft cloth. He pulled up a stool and sat down. He picked up the mainspring barrel, turning it over in his fingers. He looked lost. A 24-year-old kid, suddenly in possession of a life. He didn't know how to live. Then, something changed. His shoulders straightened. He took a deep, slow breath, taking in the scent of oil and metal. He looked at the clock not as a puzzle, but as a task, a purpose. He reached for my magnifying headset and settled it over his eyes. He picked up a tiny screwdriver, and he began to work. His movements were hesitant at first, unsure, but as he carefully cleaned a gear, as he gently tested the tension of the spring, a focus came over him. This was a language he understood, a problem that could be solved, a break that could be mended. He worked 4 hours. The world outside the workshop window darkened. A single lamp cast a pool of yellow light over the bench. He didn't stop. He was in the flow, lost in the meticulous, patient rhythm of restoration. Finally, he placed the last gear. He fitted the brass face. He carefully, so carefully, set the hands to 12. He held his breath and gave the key a turn. There was a soft, internal whirring, a series of delicate clicks, and then a sound that had been absent from the house for weeks. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The sound was soft, but in the profound silence of the workshop, it was as clear as a bell. It was the sound of order, of time moving forward, of a thing that was broken being made whole again. Leo let out a long, shuddering breath. A slow smile spread across his face, the first real, unburdened smile he'd seen on him since before the barbecue. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of understanding. He got it. This was the inheritance, not the money, not the house. The patience, the care, the respect for the way things are put together, the belief that something broken can be fixed. He would be okay. The current pulled me away again. This time, it was sharper, more insistent. It was drawn to a different kind of brokenness. I found Chloe. She was in her apartment, a cramped, messy place that reflected the chaos inside her. The $1 bill was pinned to a corkboard above her desk, a grotesque trophy. She was staring at it, a bottle of cheap vodka, half empty on the table in front of her. Her life had unraveled with spectacular speed. The fight with her parents, the humiliation of the will, the loss of the future she felt she was owed. It had all been too much. She had dropped out of her classes. Her friends, the ones who were only interested in the version of her with a rich grandfather, had drifted away. She was utterly alone. She picked up the bottle and took a long swallow, wincing as it burned its way down. Her eyes were fixed on the dollar bill. It was no longer just money. It was a mirror. It reflected back at her everything she was, a value so insignificant it was almost a joke. A closed account. My words from the letter echoed in the room, though she was the only one who could hear them in her mind. A settled transaction. She had wanted a drama, a grand, operatic feud. She had wanted to be the wronged heroine fighting a crazy old man. But I hadn't given her that. I had given her a quiet, legal, indisputable truth. She had received exactly what she had given. A transactional relationship had ended with a transaction. There was no grand villainy to fight, only the cold, hard arithmetic of her own choices. The vodka wasn't numbing the pain, it was sharpening it. It was stripping away all her defenses, all her justifications, leaving only the raw, ugly truth. She had killed her grandfather's love for her, not with a joke, but with 1,000 tiny cuts of entitlement, of avarice, of seeing him as a means to an end. And I had simply made the corpse of that love official. With a sudden, furious cry, she lunged forward and ripped the dollar bill from the corkboard. She crumpled it in her fist, her body shaking with sobs that were part rage, part grief, part a pain so deep it had no name. She was finally crying for me, not for the loss of my money or my heart, but for the loss of me. The grandfather who had bandaged her knees, the one who had secretly slipped her $20 for the movies, the one whose love she had traded for the fantasy of his death. It was the first real, unselfish emotion she had felt in years. It was agony. She uncrumpled the dollar bill and stared at it, her tears blotching the green ink. Then, slowly, deliberately, she smoothed it out on the table. She left it there, a flat, meaningless rectangle of paper, a monument to her own emptiness. She put the cap back on the vodka bottle. She didn't pour it out. The road ahead was long and hard, and she would stumble many times, but for tonight, she was done. She had reached the bottom. There was nowhere else to fall. The current released me. The pull to specific people, to specific moments of consequence, faded. I was adrift again in the silent, curious void. But I was not alone. I was aware of other presences, other frequencies, other stories that had ended and were still rippling out into the world. I understood then. This was the afterlife, not a heaven of harps and clouds, not a hell of fire and brimstone. It was a state of witness, a place of connection to the living world through the consequences of the lives we had lived. We are not judged by a bearded man on a throne. We are judged by the echo of our actions, by the love we gave or withheld, by the wounds we inflicted or healed. We are forced to watch the ripple effect of every choice, every word, every silence. And in that watching, we understand the true weight of our existence. Time meant nothing. I watched the ripples spread. I watched Leo, slowly and tentatively, begin to build his life. He didn't sell the house. He moved into it properly, making it his own. He used some of the money to go back to school, not for a generic business degree, but for a program in historical restoration. He had found his calling. He started a small business, painstakingly restoring antique furniture and mechanical instruments. He was good at it. He was happy. He tried, again and again, to reach out to Chloe. He paid off her student loans anonymously. She found out it was him and screamed at him over the phone, accusing him of pity. He didn't give up. He kept calling, leaving gentle, unassuming messages. He invited her for coffee. He never mentioned the money, the will, the heart. He just talked about his day, about a movie he'd seen. He was trying to rebuild a bridge that I had burned, stone by patient stone. I watched David. He was dating a nice woman, a librarian. He seemed lighter. He was learning to play the guitar. He was, finally, making his own happiness. I watched Chloe. Her journey was slower, darker, full of setbacks. She went to therapy. She got a job, a shitty retail job that she hated. But she showed up for it every day. It was a discipline. She started paying her own bills. It was a struggle. She often failed. The entitlement was a deep-seated weed, and pulling it out by the roots was a painful, messy process. But she was trying. The dollar bill remained on her table, a silent, sobering reminder. Years bled together. 5 years after my death, on a bright autumn day much like the one of the infamous barbecue, there was a knock on Leo's door. He opened it. Chloe was standing there. She was thinner, older. Her eyes, once so full of cold calculation, were now just tired and clear. "Hi," she said, her voice small. "Chloe," Leo said, surprised. He hadn't heard from her in over a year. "Come in." She stepped inside, her eyes taking in the house. It was different now, lived in. Leo's tools were on the coffee table, a half-restored violin on a stand by the fireplace. It was a creative, comfortable mess. "Nice place," she said softly. "Thanks." An awkward silence hung between them. I brought you this," she said, holding out a small, flat object wrapped in brown paper. Leo took it and unwrapped it. It was the dollar bill, pressed flat, preserved under a simple piece of clear plastic. "I don't want it anymore," she said, not meeting his eyes. I think He'd want you to have it." Leo looked from the dollar to her face. He understood the magnitude of the gesture. This was her white flag, her surrender, her acceptance. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll keep it safe." She nodded, her eyes glistening. She looked around the room again, and her gaze fell on the violin. "You fixed it." "Still working on it," he said. "It's a stubborn one." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He'd have liked that." "Yeah," Leo said. He would have. They stood there for another moment, in a silence that was no longer awkward, but held the fragile possibility of a new beginning. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" Leo asked. Chloe hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I'd like that." The current that held me tightened its focus one last time. It was time. The witnessing was nearing its end. The ripples were calming, spreading out into the vast ocean of the living world, becoming part of its endless, complex current. The last thing I felt was not a sight or a sound, but a feeling. It was the feeling of Leo's hand on the carriage clock, the satisfaction of the first tick. It was the feeling of Chloe's tears, finally shed for the right reason. It was the feeling of David's fingers on guitar strings, fumblingly making a new chord. It was the feeling of a heart, not a physical one, but the metaphorical one, the one that truly mattered, still beating, still giving, still connected. It was the ultimate donation, not of an organ, but of a lesson, not of wealth, but of value. It was messy, it was painful, it was imperfect, but it was mine, and it was done. The silence deepened, and the last frequency I tuned into was my own. A final, quiet click, like the closing of a well-made case. And then there was peace,